Hi, I'm Richard Maraj, Senior Minister at Unity of Phoenix Spiritual Center, and I want to thank you for visiting our website and for tuning in to today's message. If you feel inspired by today's talk, I really encourage you to make a donation by hitting that button below and making a contribution to this ministry. It'll allow us to continue these messages online and to do the great work we do here at Unity of Phoenix, which is to inspire people to live better lives. So thanks for tuning in, thanks for your support, and we hope to see you at a Sunday real soon.
Morning again, everyone. All right, a shout out to everybody who tunes in and watches us online. Hey, so how many people here have ever avoided having an important but difficult conversation because it was too uncomfortable? Anybody? How many people here have either not spoken up or suffered in silence rather than sharing your feelings and asking for what you needed? Okay, and how many people ever had a situation that was different, awkward, and painful, and you just swept it under the rug praying it would just go away by itself? Anyway, okay. So Robert Frost and Samuel Johnson both said that courage is the greatest of all virtues because it requires courage to make all the other ones possible. It takes courage to have faith. It takes courage to believe. It takes courage to trust. It takes courage to forgive. It takes courage to go after your dreams. It takes courage to heal a relationship. It takes courage to move through grief and loss. It takes courage to get up when you've been knocked down so many times. It takes courage to risk your heart for love. It takes courage to deal with an addiction. It takes courage to say yes. It takes courage to say no. It takes courage to start over. It takes courage to change. I can't think of anything in life that does not require us to demonstrate and use courage. Kind of reminds me of this elderly couple. And they're out for dinner at their retirement home, and they're having dinner, and they're enjoying it and smiling, and he's a widower, and she's a widow, and they've been dating for 2 years, and they're having a really nice time. And it's been a couple of years, and you can tell he's a little nervous, and finally he gets up the courage. He looks her right in the eye and says, "Will you marry me?" And she thinks for a few seconds and says, "Yes, yes, I will marry you." And they celebrate more, they dance, have a good time, then they go back to their respective places, and he wakes up the next day, and he can't remember if she said yes or no. And so he is trying to jog his memory, he's tripping out, freaking out, trying to remember, and he just can't remember. And so he's all nervous and with trepidation, he builds up the courage to call her, and he calls her and says, "Hey, morning, how are you? Boy, I had a good time." And then he says, "I just need to be honest with you. My memory's not what it used to be. And I remember asking you to marry me. I just can't remember if you said yes or no." And she said, "Oh, I said yes. I said, yes, I'll marry you, and I meant it with all my heart." And he said, "Whew, I feel so relieved. I'm so happy I called." And she said, "I'm glad you called too, because I couldn't remember who asked me." Okay. All right. Courage. How would you be different, and what would you do differently if you had all the courage in the world right now? How would you show up differently if you had more courage? What are the things you would do that you're not doing now that you would do if you had that level of courage? We are in week 2 of our 3-week series on Brené Brown's book, Braving the Wilderness. And if you look at her last 3 titles of her books, Braving the Wilderness, Daring Greatly, and Rising Strong, there's a continuous theme that really illustrates that it takes courage to live a rich and meaningful life. It takes courage to love at a deep and profound level. It takes courage to heal. It takes courage to have compassion. I can't think of anything in life that you want to achieve that does not require courage. And she said there's no greater thing that requires courage in our lives than the willingness to be vulnerable. She says being vulnerable is actually a prerequisite to a happier and healthier life, to happier and healthier relationships, to feeling more connected to our spirit and to our soul. But the thing about it is being vulnerable is scary. We sometimes feel exposed and embarrassed. We feel uncertain if we'll be rejected or accepted. Being vulnerable is about letting down the walls, letting down the defenses, letting go of our fears, and just sharing ourselves authentically, sharing the truth of all of who we are. And while there are risks, there are tremendous rewards of deeper connection and intimacy and closeness and a sense of fulfillment and being fully aligned with our spirits and our souls and our purpose in life. So where in your life right now are you being unwilling to be more vulnerable when you know being vulnerable will actually help you have a better relationship and a better level of happiness? Last week we looked at two things that we all seek as human beings that we sometimes don't even realize that we're seeking, that I say are two of the most important things in life. And the first one is that we're all seeking a sense of belonging. Every one of us wants to feel a connection. We want to feel loved. We want to feel accepted. We want to feel valued and appreciated. We want to know that our life makes a difference, that we are needed, that we're seen, that we're respected. I bet every one of us has had experiences where we felt like we didn't fit in, where we felt alone and isolated, where we felt like we didn't belong, that we were out of place. You know, that sense of belonging, being a part of something, whether it's our family or a community or a relationship, whatever it is, we all seek that very, very much. And the other thing that we seek is to be true to ourselves, to live our most authentic life. I think we've all done things, and I know people who become lawyers just because their dad is, but not because they wanted to. We have done things that have been out of alignment with the truth of who we are just to please other people or live up to what other people's expectations are. There's nothing better than being true to yourself, feeling that you are living your most authentic life, that you're comfortable in your own skin, you're being who you're meant to be. And the challenge of it is sometimes when we're true to ourselves, sometimes we stand alone, that people won't support us all the time, and we feel like we miss out on that sense of belonging and connection. And sometimes to feel a sense of connection, we give up, our most authentic self. And we sometimes feel like we can only have one and not the other, but the truth is we can actually have both. Because when we try to not have either and try to please and dance on both sides, it leads us to the most painful experience of life, and that is loneliness. Do you know loneliness are at record highs in our country, which is shocking to me. Even in being in a room full of people, more people are reporting that they feel alone and lonely. Brené Brown says we can have both, and here's what she calls it, true belonging. She says true belonging is about fitting in and being different. It is to fit in without losing who you are, being authentic, and also to not isolate ourselves because we stand in our truth. We can stand alone and still feel connected and a sense of belonging, but it requires the courage to be vulnerable. While we all yearn for this connection, this closeness, this sense of love, sometimes we human beings have a pattern that we engage in that is actually very unhealthy, not helpful, and harmful to feeling the very love and connection that we want. And what the thing is that we do, often when we disagree with other people, we push them away or we run away. We create distance and we feel disconnected and dislike. We devalue and diminish and even dehumanize. We live times right now that are extremely polarizing and divisive. And the more we create separation and distance, guess what? The more loneliness and isolation and the very things that we don't want get created even more. While our soul wants this connection, it's funny that our humanness will sometimes choose to act in ways that create more separation and distance. And Brené Brown says the distance and loneliness that we feel really comes from our own fear and our unwillingness to deal with our own pain and instead project it and blame other people. And she said one of the things that distance, she calls it the process of dehumanizing and creating distance and disconnection, thinking it's protecting us. She said where it starts is with language and with labeling of people. This is going to be a little uncomfortable, but these are factual things that she writes in her books. She said in the Holocaust, Jews were referred to as rats. In the Rwanda genocide, the people were referred to as cockroaches. Native Americans here have been referred to as savages. African Americans have been referred to as slaves, and worse, and seen as animals. That sometimes this distancing and dehumanizing is that some way we give ourselves the permission that it's okay to dishonor and disrespect people, creating attributes of images of people being inferior and less than. And it's our way of giving ourselves permission to not deal with our own fears and discomfort and try to project it on to others. And it creates an us versus them, which creates everything that we don't want. The greatest commandment is to love God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love others as ourselves. And we talk about the law of attraction. And how do this kind of behavior of separation really help us? Charles Fillmore said that the quality of our lives are directly related to the quality of thoughts that we think about other people. So this labeling and stuff that we do really is kind of hurting us and contributing more to pain than it is to what it is that we want, which is love, which is connection. And so she says, of this pain that we all feel, that it can actually be transformed into love and to healing if we feel it, process it, and willing to be vulnerable through it. But if we shut it down, hold it, and hold on to grudge and bury it, that it will just turn into horrible behaviors and horrible feelings that we hold towards each other, which gets us nowhere. And so she said, instead of running away or pushing away, she says we need to move in. The chapter is entitled, "It is not easy to hate people up close, so move in." So move in. And we need to develop tools to heal these relationships and create connection and more intimacy and closeness. And she calls these are the tools we need to brave the wilderness, which is the journey from feeling isolated, alone, and not being true to ourselves, to feeling connected, feeling a sense of belonging, and feeling we're living our most authentic life. And particularly, in all areas of our life, our family, all of our relationships. So these are the 5 skills for transforming that pain and braving the wilderness. The first one is to identify areas in our own life where we're distancing, devaluing, diminishing, and dehumanizing folks. And we don't really think we do this, but we kind of do it even in our families. I bet everyone says, oh, he's the black sheep of the family. He's the weird one, or whatever. We say things like this, and we kind of distance and just come up with all kinds of names, and they're horrible that we label people. We'll say stuff like deadbeat and slime bag. We have a boss, he's a dirt bag. We say things like this that are just horrible. They're losing. We judge people based on their gender, their sexual orientation, if they're of a certain religion, if they're of a certain race, if they're a certain color, if they have a certain disability, if they're short, if they're overweight, if they're Canadian, or if they're from Scottsdale. All kinds of stuff's going on. And what we do, it's like we kind of think it's not a big deal, like the extreme that I gave you, about rats and cockroaches and stuff. And we think it's not a big deal, but it does create distance. It does create a disconnect. And we start making assumptions, and it does kind of dehumanize. So we need to look, who are we leaving outside of our hearts? Who are we labeling? Who are we devaluing at some level that they're not as good? And what she says is that we need to start looking our own lives, see where we're dehumanizing, and start rehumanizing. Remembering whoever it is you don't like, and not excusing anybody's behavior, but they're still a child of God. That they still deserve love. Their behavior may be inappropriate, but you don't need to call them those names and label them those things. And so where in your life, who are you leaving outside of your heart, and who are you judging as less than? And who do we need to start in our own minds rehumanizing? And so the next one is that in situations in our lives, we need to find a way to be vulnerable and share the truth of what's going on with us with the people that need to know it. This isn't spilling your guts to every stranger. This is talking about, we know that there are people in our lives that we're holding things from. Sometimes we get to this thing, let's agree to disagree. Or let's just better not say anything so we can keep the peace. But ultimately, that actually festers, and ultimately one day will show this thing wasn't healthy in the first place. And so it's important to be able to share that. And there are different ways it could be shared. Of course, ideal, a heart-to-heart conversation would be great, but that doesn't work for everybody. I had a friend, and I like to just talk it and answer questions, and let's do it. And this person didn't. And so they once said to me, hey, would you be okay if I texted you? And I said, sure. And she said, I get a little emotional. All my words don't come out the way I want. But if I get to do that, I get to think about it, and then you could read it and blah, blah, blah. And then not only did I do that, and then I responded, quickly of course, she had said, would you be okay if I took a couple of days to process this and respond to you? And so sometimes you need to like figure out what it is, not just shut it down because our styles are different, because it's vital to be vulnerable and share what's going on with us, with other people. Otherwise, we keep building false truths. We pretend that things are going on. And while it could look nice on the outside because no one's arguing or yelling, it could be soul crushing because it's not authentic. Number 3 is to go deeper and to listen with understanding to what the other person's intention is. To not just hear, hey, I don't like this, but to find out why that's important to them, why that has meaning to them, why it has such value. And sometimes we need to say, hey, help me understand a little better. Or can you tell me a little bit more about that? Help me understand. I had a friend, and her husband, he would come home from work, and she would want to talk about her day, and she'd start talking, and he's kind of checking the mail and kind of quite not hearing and quite not responding, and she's getting annoyed and frustrated because he's not really listening, thinking he doesn't care. And so this goes on. It's like frustration, and finally they decide to have a chat. And then what she found out is he does want to make a connection, but after work, his head's so filled with work stuff, he just needs to unwind and do non-thinking stuff, like checking the mail, feeding the dog, and having a shower. And so they came up with an agreement because what? They understood both their intention was the same, to connect. But when and how needed to be negotiated. And so they decided he could come home, check this, kiss, hi, check the mail, feed the dog, have a shower, and then during dinner they'd start chatting, and then afterwards there would be undivided attention. And it worked. Because when you know what the person's intention is, then you understand things better and you're able to, work things out differently. Is this making sense, everybody? You're being so quiet, I'm wondering. I feel like I'm the only one talking. And so, and then the next one is, if you want to go all the way healthy, sometimes we need to call the nonsense and drama that's going on in our lives and the thoughts that we have that aren't real, we need to call it. Sometimes we make up stories. Sometimes we make up excuse or play the victim. And some things are just not true. And sometimes we just need to say, you know what, that doesn't sound like it's quite true. Is that true that blah, blah, blah happens? Sometimes we make stuff up we don't even understand. And sometimes, and I don't want to say especially men, but they're human beings who sometimes don't want to admit they're wrong and just start making up stuff to make it sound like they know what they're doing. And sometimes we need to call some of these things. And sometimes we have beliefs we don't even understand why. We grew up, and my father would say, if you want to start a project and make it successful, start it on Tuesday. I grew up starting everything big on Tuesdays. And halfway I realized, what's the big deal about Tuesdays? I think he made it up. Or that one about this family tradition, they used to cut the ham leg. They get it and they cut the ham leg, and generations go by, and somebody said, hey, how come where'd that tradition of cutting the ham leg before we put it in? And they did some research, and they found out originally the great-grandmother, whoever it was that started cooking the ham, her stove wasn't big enough, so you had to cut the ham leg off. And that wasn't the case anymore. And it sounds ridiculous, but sometimes we do things and we don't even know why we're doing it. Sometimes even in relationships and communities and works, we have to ask ourselves, why are we doing this? Does it make sense anymore? Sometimes you need to look at the drama, look at the things that aren't effective that we've been doing for a long time and feel so attached to, and maybe point the light to it and realize that's not the healthiest and best thing. Last one is to always be civil and supportive. Sometimes when things don't go our way, we can get angry and insult or bring up the past. But the most important thing, if we're both caring about each other and one another, and we know what we should focus on is a solution. So where are we today, and how can we make our future better? So we're not keep banging on each other like this all the time. What's going to work? And we can stay civil, because if the goal is to heal it and improve it, and because we love each other and we know our intention is this, then we should be able to stay civil and stay focused. Interesting, we grew up in a culture, the competition will bring out the best. It's a dog-eat-dog world. City show? Not true. showing that collaboration and cooperation create more success for everyone than competition. We aren't in a competition with our partner. We're not in competition with each other. The collaboration, cooperation, open-hearted sharing that only comes with being vulnerable, that's the thing that'll get us further. How many people know who Viola Davis is, the actress? Everybody? First African-American to win an Emmy, Oscar, and a Tony for the first 3/4 of her life that she grew up not fitting in. Grew up in a Irish Catholic neighborhood, hardly any people of color. She felt very different. She felt like she didn't belong. They were very, very poor. The father was a violent alcoholic. She was a chronic bedwetter until she was about 13 or 14 years old. Went to school, always smelled. Teachers complained it was humiliating and horrible for her. At 14, she kind of stood up to her father's violence against her mom once. And then from that point, she realizes she needed to get some help. She needed to look at this. And so she went and has done a lot of therapy and did a lot of therapy then. And at one point, her therapist said, "What if nothing ever changes? Would you be okay?" And it was in that moment she realized that nothing in her past and nothing her father ever or anybody did could stop her from living and defining who she really is. And so she owned her pain and her struggle. She owned her story, but she started writing a new story. She started transforming that energy of pain and hurt by acknowledging it, being vulnerable, and then investing all that in all of her acting, and it transformed her ability to touch and to uplift and inspire through whatever character she was acting. She met a fabulous man who's her husband today. An interesting and cool thing is she didn't distance herself completely or run away from her father. She spent time, particularly when he was dying, on her sister. And it was funny, holding hands with her and stuff. Somehow he became vulnerable and started sharing about his hurt and pain and his loss and how he was mistreated. Not to be an excuse, but he just needed to share. And she realized in the same way that her story was important, that his story mattered too. That even though he treated her and her mom that way, he couldn't be totally discounted what his experience in life was. Not to excuse behaviors, but to at least begin to open a door of understanding that we all have journeys of this and all have areas that need to be healed and transformed and shouldn't be discarded or dehumanized. She's still in the acting world, and she said, when we go through these, we are more connected, we are more true to ourselves, but it doesn't mean life gets easy. She says in the acting culture, there's a lot of insecurity, there's a lot of judgment, there's a lot of wondering if I'm too thin, or I'm not thin enough, or not this enough. And she said, it is that environment, but it's the commitment to connection, belonging, and being true to ourselves that helps her keep thriving in an environment that doesn't always necessarily support that, which I thought was very cool. No matter what you think you do for a living or what it is, every single one of us are in the same business, and we're all in the people business, because life is about relationships. And the only way for us to belong to a community, belong to our families, first to belong to ourselves. And so I would say these 5 points, they should move in and be what we live. Number one, look at how we're dehumanizing ourselves, how we're labeling and judging and putting ourselves down. The fact of the matter is we are all children of God, and that you are the light of the world. You are God's beloved child. We need to recognize and rehumanize and spiritualize ourselves in the truth of who we are and not put ourselves down. Secondly, is to get honest. Don't hide your stuff. Sometimes we're not even honest with ourselves. We need to find ways to be more honest with ourselves. Journaling, going to a therapist, whatever it takes. Don't stuff that stuff. The next one is to go a little deeper and find out what's really going on with us. What is our intention? What is our desire? What are our hopes? To truly understand ourselves. The next one is to be aware of our own drama and stuff. Sometimes I just make stuff up in my head, and sometimes I have to tell myself, that's not true. You made that up. I make up stuff. But I'm getting better at realizing, calling myself on, hey, that's not true. And the final one is be civil. Be gentle with yourself. Be encouraging. Nobody gets this stuff right all the time. Life isn't easy. Healing and transformation and growth and change, it's not easy. So be civil, be gentle with yourself. Don't beat yourself up for what happened in the past. Know where you are today and help yourself have a better tomorrow. Help yourself have a better future because you deserve it. See, with life, we can run away and we can hide, but the key is to move in, to be more vulnerable in our relationships, but it starts by being vulnerable in ourselves. You see, we can't accept others till we accept us. We can't belong to others till we belong to us. You know, we can't have compassion for others until we have compassion for ourselves. The two things we yearn for more than anything else, belonging, being true to ourselves. And that if we follow this path, that it will open our hearts, it will open our minds, it will open our lives, it will open our world, and it will bring more light. The question is, are you willing, first, to brave the wilderness? God bless you all.